Hey, if you got to store some welding rods, there's different things you can do. These cans that you buy hold about 10 pounds, got a rubber seal on them. They're really good for putting in the truck, hauling some around. Not that big of a quantity of rods in there. But you got about 10 pounds and you can separate them nicely. It's really important to know that there's differences in these welding rods that's going to prevent you from wanting to mix them in the same storage. Good example is like a low hydrogen rod, like a 7018, should never be stored in the same container as something like a pipeline rod that's a cellulose rod that contains moisture. Your 7018 rods, when they do something like really nuke plant, really highly inspected, highly regulated sort of thing, your 7018 rods in those cases are almost always kept in a rod oven at a certain warm temperature. Now, for my use, a rod oven is completely useless. I have no use for a rod oven at all. And there's actually a lot of cases where guys got a rod oven and they would put something like their cellulose pipe rods in it, which are supposed to contain moisture, and they destroyed their pipe rods because they wiped the moisture out of the pipe rods. That moisture's supposed to be in them rods, and you just don't want to mess with that and dry it out. It'll actually, cellulose-based pipe rods run worse if they're too dry than if you were to stick them in a bucket of water and get them too wet. Now, the 7018s, as a low hydrogen that for critical application is supposed to be warm, for my application does not need to be warm. I see very little to no difference whatsoever in a rod that's come right out of a can or one that I've stored the way I store rods literally for years. And the way I store a lot of them is in those blue cans. Now, for a little bit longer term storage and a way to store a larger amount of rods, I use a 4-inch PVC pipe, and I use these type of test caps. You see how this rubber seal works. The more you tighten this wing nut, the tighter that rubber seal gets. What this is going to do is, however that rod is when you take it out of that can right there, if you pack them tight in that tube, like this tube's long enough for 2 rows, and each bundle in a 4-inch, each bundle will be about 22 pounds of rod. So this one that I do a double in, you're gonna put at most 44 pounds of rod in a double like this. Now, when you show people one of these, they'll say, well, why do you use them in both ends? Why don't you glue a cap on one end? Because you don't need to take them off of both ends. Well, for some stupid reason, this is cheaper than a glue-on cap. So I'm not going to pay more for a glue-on cap if I can buy this one and stick in both ends, and you're not going to get sealed any better than what that's going to seal anyway. So the way I do these for a long-term storage is I'll take this this shrink wrap stuff and I'll wrap it up. I'll set my rods in here where they're sticking out. And when this is sticking out like this, it's going to tell me how much I want to fit in here, and I'm not going to make my bundle bigger than what will fit in the pipe. And I'll wrap the shrink wrap around them rods, and that's the first part of it. Now we're not really counting on that wrap to make a seal. This is going to make the seal. What the wrap does is it keeps them together so they're not a mess in there. They don't get jammed in against one another in this 2-row deal. Now I usually put a piece of masking tape on and write on that. That way if I use this tube for different rods, I can just peel that off and I don't end up with a million different Sharpie markers all over the thing and have to cross them out and all that. You might get a deal on some rods sometime, find some guy that bought a can and needs some cash. You might just stock up on some stuff because your local supply doesn't keep enough of a certain thing in. And you know, I've had occasions where I've stored a certain kind of electrode here because when I need it, I need 150 pounds of it. And if it's something rare that a lot of people don't use, my welding supply, they don't keep 150 pounds of it in stock. I've had occasions where I had 150 pounds of rod here for 5 years. And then when I needed them, I burned all of them up in no time. Job I just did recently, I burned 177 pounds of electrode in 11 days. And that was electrode I bought 5 or 6 years ago. So, you know, you got something, you need to get it done. If you ain't got the material, you ain't got the rods, you can't get it done. So you got to have the stuff. That's how I store them. Works great for me. See ya.